Imagine this. A young woman, dressed in her crisp military uniform, stands in front of her family on the most important day of her life, her wedding day. The room is filled with laughter, whispers, and the kind of tension you can feel in your bones. But instead of support, instead of pride, her father smirks and throws out a cruel comment loud enough for everyone to hear. A soldier bride? What a joke. Who would want a wife who spends more time in boots than in a home? The hall goes silent. Guests exchange awkward glances. The groom squeezes her hand under the table, but the sting of those words slices through her heart. What happened next? You won't believe it. Because just when her father thought he had the last word, 150 uniformed soldiers stormed into the venue, lined up with perfect precision, and raised their hands in a salute that silenced the entire crowd. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a battlefield of respect, honor, and a daughter's ultimate revenge on the man who tried to break her spirit. Backhand index pointing right, but before I tell you exactly how this unbelievable moment unfolded, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more shocking, emotional, and inspiring real-life stories. Your support keeps stories like these alive. The story begins. Her name was Emily Carter, a 28-year-old Army officer based in Texas. Emily wasn't born into a military family. In fact, her father, Richard Carter, openly mocked the military, calling it a waste of a life. He always wanted Emily to follow in his footsteps, to work at the family's law firm. But Emily's heart beat differently. From childhood, she admired strength, honor, and service. At 18, she shocked everyone when she enlisted. Richard took it as a personal insult. From that day on, their relationship was a war zone. Every holiday dinner turned into a debate, every visit filled with cutting remarks. Her mother, Linda, stayed silent, caught between husband and daughter. And Emily's younger brother, Jason, learned to avoid the crossfire. Yet Emily rose through the ranks with grit and determination. By 28, she had not only earned respect but also the love of her life, Daniel Brooks, a fellow officer she met on base. Their connection was instant, forged in long nights of training, shared sacrifices, and unspoken understanding. When Daniel proposed, Emily dreamed of one thing: a wedding where her family would finally see her worth. Maybe, just maybe, her father would look at her in that uniform and feel proud. But she underestimated Richard's pride. The day of the wedding arrived. The venue was a grand hall decorated with white roses and blue ribbons, Emily's favorite colors. Soldiers from her unit were scattered among the guests, mingling politely, their posture upright, their presence undeniable. Emily walked down the aisle in her uniform, her medals glistening under the lights. Instead of gasps of admiration, she caught the sight of her father rolling his eyes. He whispered to Linda, shaking his head, as if her very presence in uniform embarrassed him. Still, Emily kept her chin high. She was determined not to let him ruin her day. The ceremony began, vows were exchanged, and for a brief moment, she felt untouchable. Until dinner. It started small. Richard raised his glass, pretending to toast. But instead of kind words, he laughed bitterly. To my daughter, who decided that wearing combat boots was more important than wearing heels. May her husband enjoy a wife who's never home, always marching to someone else's orders. The room froze. Forks clattered onto plates. A hush spread like wildfire. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed seated. Emily's heart pounded, her cheeks burned. She had prepared herself for something, but not this level of public humiliation. She could see her mother's eyes glisten with shame. Jason stared at the floor, wishing he could disappear. And Richard? He looked satisfied, as if he'd won some invisible battle. Emily excused herself, walking briskly to the hallway, her boots clicking against the marble floor. She needed a breath, a moment to swallow the pain. But what she didn't know was that her unit, her brothers and sisters in arms, had been planning something extraordinary behind her back. As dessert was being served, the double doors of the hall burst open. The sound of boots echoed, sharp and synchronized. One by one, soldiers filed in, 150 of them, their uniforms pristine, their faces solemn. Guests gasped, turning in their seats. At the front, Captain Rodriguez, Emily's commanding officer, stepped forward. His voice thundered across the hall. "Lieutenant Emily Carter, today we honor not only your marriage but your service. You represent strength, sacrifice, and resilience. And no voice, no matter how close to home, can diminish that." On his command, the soldiers snapped into formation. As one, they raised their hands in a flawless salute, directed at Emily. The room shook with silent power. Emily froze, tears welling in her eyes. Every insult, every doubt, every cruel word from her father was drowned in that sea of respect. She felt taller, stronger, unstoppable. Richard's smirk vanished. His glass slipped slightly in his hand. For the first time, he looked small. The applause that followed was deafening. Guests stood, clapping and cheering. Daniel wrapped his arm around Emily, whispering, "This is your family. And I'm proud of you." But Richard wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't let him back down, not yet. He rose to his feet, voice shaking with fury. "This is ridiculous. A wedding is about family, not about parading soldiers like it's some kind of circus." Gasps filled the hall again. But this time, Emily didn't flinch. She turned, her voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "Family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. If you can't see that, maybe you don't belong here." The silence that followed was colder than any winter storm. Even Linda looked away from her husband, shame etched on her face. Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him. But the night wasn't over. Because Richard had one last card to play, something that could ruin not just the wedding, but Emily's entire career. The heavy slam of the door echoed long after Richard stormed out of the wedding hall. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick, suffocating, and charged with tension. Guests whispered, soldiers shifted slightly, and Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel leaned close. "Ignore him," he whispered. "He can't touch what we have." But Emily knew her father too well. Richard Carter wasn't the kind of man to walk away defeated. When his pride was wounded, he always came back swinging. And this time, she could feel it in her bones, he wasn't finished. Hours later, as the wedding wrapped up, Emily and Daniel returned to their hotel suite, exhausted but still glowing from the overwhelming support of her fellow soldiers. They were laughing softly, replaying the salute in their minds, when Emily's phone buzzed. It was Jason. His voice was low, urgent. "Emily. Dad's planning something. He's talking about reporting you. He says he has evidence." Emily froze. "Evidence of what?" Jason hesitated. "He said you mishandled funds from the Army family fundraiser. He has some paperwork, don't ask me how he got it. He says he's going to ruin your career, Em." Emily's stomach dropped. She had organized that fundraiser months ago, every cent had gone exactly where it should. But Richard was a lawyer, skilled in twisting words and fabricating stories. If he had doctored documents, he could cause serious damage. Daniel clenched his fists. He's bluffing. He's just angry. But Emily knew better. Richard had power, connections, and a cold, calculating mind. The next morning, as Emily sat sipping coffee, her worst fear came true: a knock on the door. 2 military investigators stood there, polite but firm. "Lieutenant Carter, we received an anonymous tip about potential financial irregularities in the fundraiser you managed. We'll need to ask you some questions." Emily's world spun. Guests were still in town. Her wedding had barely ended, and already her father's venom was poisoning her life. She sat through hours of questioning, calmly explaining every receipt, every dollar, every volunteer. She knew she was innocent, but the shadow of suspicion clung to her like smoke. That evening, she called Jason again. "Why is he doing this to me? What does he get out of destroying his own daughter's life?" Jason's voice cracked. "Because he can't stand not being in control. You defied him, and now he wants to prove that without him, you're nothing." Emily had a choice: let Richard's lies drag her down, or fight back with everything she had. So she chose war. Over the next week, Emily began gathering evidence of her own. She pulled every record, every email, every text regarding the fundraiser. But she also dug deeper. Richard had always hidden things, keeping his family under his thumb. Maybe this time, she could expose him. Jason, torn between loyalty to his father and love for his sister, made a decision. One night, he slipped into Richard's study and quietly scanned files into a flash drive. When he handed it to Emily, his hands trembled. "Be careful. If he finds out I gave you this." Emily hugged him. "You did the right thing." Inside the files, Emily found exactly what she needed, and more. Richard had been funneling money from his law firm's clients, using shell accounts and fake names. The very man accusing her of corruption was knee-deep in financial crimes himself. Emily stared at the screen, her anger boiling into resolve. He wanted a war. Now he'll get one. The day of her hearing arrived. Richard showed up, smug in his tailored suit, ready to see his daughter fall. He sat in the back, arms crossed, lips curled in a satisfied smile. Emily stood before the panel, calm and steady. She presented her records, her receipts, her spotless trail of honesty. But then, she dropped the bombshell. "And as for the anonymous tip," she said, her voice ringing through the room, "I would like to submit evidence of who truly has been engaging in financial misconduct." She clicked the projector, and Richard's forged accounts, secret transfers, and incriminating documents lit up the screen. Gasps filled the room. Richard's face drained of color. One of the investigators turned toward him. "Mr. Carter, we'll need to speak with you." The tables had turned. Richard stumbled to his feet, stammering, This is a mistake. She's framing me." But the evidence was undeniable. Jason stepped into the room, his voice firm, "No, Dad. She's telling the truth. And you know it." For once, Richard was speechless. The panel cleared Emily of all accusations, praising her integrity and composure. As she walked out, soldiers from her unit greeted her with salutes, not just for her service, but for her courage. Richard's downfall was swift. His reputation shattered, his law license suspended, and whispers of criminal charges circling him. For a man who thrived on control, losing everything was the ultimate punishment. And Emily? She walked away stronger than ever, her head high, her hand in Daniel's, her brother finally by her side. That night, as the three of them sat together, Jason whispered, "You won, Emily." Not just against him, but against everything he ever tried to make you believe about yourself. Emily smiled faintly. "No, Jason. We all won. Because he doesn't get to define us anymore." Months later, Emily received a letter. It was from Richard, written in shaky handwriting. "Emily, I don't expect forgiveness. But know this, losing everything forced me to see that I was wrong. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Maybe I was afraid of being left behind. Dad." Emily folded the letter carefully, tucking it away. She didn't know if she'd ever forgive him. But she knew one thing, his words no longer held power over her. Because she had built her own family, the one that saluted her, stood by her, and loved her without conditions. And so, the soldier bride who once endured mockery stood victorious, not just in uniform, not just as a wife, but as a daughter who refused to be broken. Her wedding day became more than a celebration of love. It became a battle, and her greatest victory.